My name is Gail Lewis. I just became a viral sensation on TikTok. Most people don't know this, but I have a legit haunted hearse. It has a few spirits in it. You ever heard of like a pinging in your ear? I'm getting that right now. That means those spirits talking to me.
You're gonna have Gail do an Estes method session.
Look out.
Mildred, did you kill a woman named Hannah?
Oh! Yay! Thank you!
Oh my god.
She shot me.
He's coming.
Okay. In front of all of us right here. Yeah. I think they actually like you guys in here. They're probably getting a kick out of it.
This young girl had a basketball for legs. In 2000, 4-year-old Quinn Hung Yang was involved in a devastating car accident that changed her life forever. Living in a poor village in China, her injuries were so severe that doctors had no choice but to amputate both of her legs. Her family couldn't afford proper prosthetics, so Quinn's grandfather improvised. He cut a basketball in half, placed padding inside, and helped her balance on it. Using her arms to walk, she would swing her small body forward on the basketball in wooden handles, refusing to let her disability define her. Children in the village began calling her Basketball Girl, but instead of feeling ashamed, Quinn wore the nickname like armor. Photos of her determination went viral in 2005, capturing hearts around the world. She wasn't begging for sympathy, she was fighting to move forward, one painful push at a time. Moved by her resilience, the Chinese government stepped in. That same year, Quinn was brought to Beijing where she received custom-fitted prosthetic legs and began formal rehabilitation. It wasn't just about walking, it was about reclaiming her future.
A massive trigger warning right now in San Isidro, Argentina. Kids were coming home with like bruises. They were just throwing random tantrums. They were showing fear of water. And there was a father. His name is Diego Hernandez. He has a wife and a 1.5-year-old. And she would go to this maternal kindergarten. It was just a preschool for kids that were 2 years or younger. And Diego and his wife noticed that their daughter began to space out a lot. Like she was struggling to finish any tasks and stuff. And they ended up giving her extra classes for her to learn, so they contacted a different program where they would have a teacher come to the house and tutor her. And then the teacher's like, whoa, what the she goes to this school? And then they were confused. They were like, yeah, like, I mean, we've always brung her there. There was no problem. She basically explains, like, I used to work at that school, but I didn't really like it because there was stuff that I didn't agree with. But the father, Diego, he decides, I want to investigate. I want to see what the fuck is going on in the school. So he ends up putting an iPod inside her backpack, leaves her recording, and then after he reviews the iPod, it's revealed that the teachers or the teacher in that daycare is verbally abusing them. You hear a bunch of kids crying and stuff like they're scared, and basically tells them like, yo, shut up, if not I'm gonna drown you guys. And you can hear kids saying, please no, like not the water. He had like over 4 hours of audio, but it was only 2 minutes that was revealed to the public. I'm gonna show you guys that right now, and it's scary because like this could happen to anybody's kid.
Although we don't know exactly what happened to Ray, there are a few theories. One theory is that Ray really did just end his own life, that he really did just jump off the roof that night. Ray and Allison had reportedly gone to the Belvedere Hotel's roof twice in the past to watch the sunset. And when Ray ran out of his house in a panic that night, he left a website up on his computer that showed where the sun was going to be setting that night in Baltimore, which was in the general area of the hotel. His family does not believe that he would willingly jump off of a roof though, because he was terrified of heights. Another theory is that he suffered some sort of mental break and ended his own life following a manic episode. Authorities believe this is likely what happened, especially after examining the letter he wrote. Ray didn't have any history of mental illness, but the letter was a clear indicator that he could have been going through an unexpected manic episode. This would also explain his growing paranoia and his new interest in the Freemasons. Theory number 3 is that he was murdered and that foul play was involved, even though police found no evidence of this. It is odd that his injuries don't exactly match with falling off of a roof. That, along with the drag marks in his shoes, leads some people to believe that he could have been hit by a car. Adding to this theory is the fact that the lead investigator on the case believed that this was a homicide, citing that the hole he supposedly fell in was too clean of a hole and rather too small to fit his body. But suspiciously, this investigator was taken off the case, so he didn't really get a say in the final ruling. Some think that his body was just stored in the hotel's conference room for some reason, and that he was placed under the hole to make it look like he fell. Another really wild theory that for some reason was going around was that Ray's body was thrown from a helicopter. helicopter. I'm not sure why this rumor started, but I guess it was because the area of this hotel is a really popular area, yet no one saw Ray in or outside of the hotel at all. But nobody saw a helicopter in the area either, and this wouldn't make sense because a helicopter wouldn't have hovered low enough to toss him directly onto the roof. Theory number 4 is that Ray's best friend Porter, or at the very least his company, was involved. Like I said, the last call that Ray ever got that night was from someone at that company, and I'm not entirely sure if it's a coincidence that the hotel / where he died was near Porter's company. It was reported early on that after Ray went missing, Porter's behavior changed and he refused to talk to the police or help his family in the search. There was also a rumor that Porter issued a gag order on his employees immediately after Ray's body was found, and then he lawyered up. How true that is though, I'm not sure, because according to Porter, he did help in the search for Ray, and he did cooperate with police. To me, there is a lot here that does point to foul play, but there's also a lot that suggests he could have taken his own life. He could have had a psychotic break that no one knew he was going through, or there really could have been someone out to get him. But it's now been 19 years, and whatever happened to Ray that night at the hotel remains a mystery.
It was Canada's worst ever theme park disaster, and park guests could only watch on in horror as people were thrown to their deaths in front of them. It was the 14th of June 1986 in Alberta, Canada. West Edmonton Mall was a huge shopping centre, and I feel from what I've seen it kind of looks like a bigger version of the Trafford Centre in the UK. Inside was also a theme park. This mall really had everything. There was a big water world style wave pool and loads of fairground rides. And the theme park inside was called Galaxyland, and it was home to a roller coaster called the Mindbender. And it was actually really huge. It was so high that I believe it was the tallest indoor roller coaster, at least at the time. As the name suggests, the ride was intended to kind of disorient you, much like the Smiler in the UK, and we all know how that ended. I did a video on that recently. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. So eerily, the roller coaster had been coined the world's safest roller coaster, and I just think that calling that in itself is just tempting fate. Like, didn't they call the Titanic the unsinkable ship at one point? On the night in question, those manning the roller coasters noticed that there was some weird noises coming from this one in particular, and much like they did with the Smiler roller coaster, the workers temporarily halted the ride, got engineers to check it over, make sure it was okay, then sent empty carts back round the track to test it. Following this, it kind of felt like the ride was okay, it seemed safe, everything was back to normal, the noises stopped. Thinking all was resolved, the workers then reopened the ride and loaded some more unsuspecting guests onto the next carts. But to their horror, during one of the final loops of the ride, suddenly one of the carts became loose. And this is like something off a horror film. The park goers watched on in horror as the cart derailed and smacked into a pillar at 100 kilometers an hour. Lap belts that were kind of once like holding the passengers in safely in place came loose, and the cart violently threw passengers through the air onto the concrete below. Now, this was one of the riders at the time. His name was Rod Chaco, and he'd gone on the ride with his friend, 24-year-old David Sager. They were sat behind a lovely engaged couple. This was Tony Mandrowsk, aged 24, and Cindy Sims, 21. Rod recalled this horrifying moment where the cart like swayed and he was suddenly thrown out and hit the ground. His legs were shattered. He suffered numerous broken bones, including his feet, pelvis, and lower back and ribs. Bodies littered the floor of the theme park and ambulances raced to the scene. Multiple injured people, including Rob, were rushed to hospital, but tragically, David, Tony, and Cindy were killed in the crash. Now, as I said, Rob was so injured, the doctors actually couldn't even count the amount of broken bones he sustained, but thankfully they were able to save his legs without having to amputate. The disaster was determined to be due to manufacturing flaws and 4 bolts that had come loose. Although Rod did survive the horror crash, he was left with lifelong chronic back pain. He feels that it's not right that there isn't a memorial site, like a specific memorial site to honour the deceased, but the mall were trying to keep him sweet by giving him free tickets to the park if he ever needed them. The ride was reopened and ultimately only properly closed in 2023.
This man was swallowed in his sleep by a sinkhole. On February 28, 2013, just before midnight, the quiet town of Seffner, Florida was shattered by a nightmare that still haunts many to this day. 37-year-old Jeff Bush had just gone to bed, unaware that a hidden danger lay directly beneath him. Without warning, the ground beneath his bedroom collapsed, creating a massive sinkhole that stretched 20 feet across and at least 50 feet deep. In seconds, Jeff and everything around him was gone, completely swallowed by the sinkhole with no chance to escape. Hearing the chaos, Jeff's brother Jeremy raced into the room. He saw nothing but a gaping hole where Jeff's bed had been moments before. Desperate, Jeremy tried to pull him out, risking his own life, but it was too late. Jeff was sadly dead. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but the ground continued to crumble, making it too dangerous for anyone to go in after Jeff. And after hours of searching, it was clear that Jeff would never be recovered. The sinkhole was too unstable and too deep. Sadly, Jeff's body was never recovered.
I'm gonna show 2 videos right now. These kids were just playing, soccer inside, and in the background, the duende appears.
The duende? Oh, I've seen this video before. It's fucking horror nostalgia right here.
Mañana vamos contra el de Atlético.
I remember seeing this video, bro.
And then the other video is this one. It's titled Aparición de un Duende.
Oh, I've never seen this one before. What the? I feel like that's more real than the other one. The other one I feel like is mocking this one, bro.
Let me know if you guys have ever have any experiences with duendes, gnomes, goblins, leprechauns, whatever the case may be. Let us know in the comments. The first one seemed a little fake, like you said.
I feel like the first one could be like a little 3-year-old toddler is wearing like a duende cloak or something.
This is one of the most evil men in American history. Meet Warren Jeffs, a Mormon cult leader and child predator, who at the time of his arrest had approximately 78 wives, many of which were underage wives, I use that term loosely, who had been forcibly married to Warren as child brides. One episode of Freeform's new show, How I Escaped My Cult, which is now available to stream on Hulu, goes into great detail on this case. But I still want to cover some disturbing points here. Warren Jeffs was born more than 2 months prematurely in Sacramento, California on December 3rd, 1955. In 1976, the year he turned 21, Warren became the principal of the Alta Academy, an FLDS, or Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, private school located at the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon. And it should be noted here that the FLDS is an offshoot of Mormonism that believes in and practices polygamy. Warren's father, Rulon Jeffs, became the leader of the FLDS Church in 1986, and eventually had 19 or 20 wives and approximately 60 children. Upon his father's death, Warren immediately married almost all of his father's widows and established himself as the sole authority on marriages in the church. And in 2002, Warren took over as the leader of the FLDS Church, establishing himself as president and prophet. As president and prophet, Warren controlled who married whom, had the power to reassign wives, kids, and even homes as punishment, and managed a huge chunk of property worth over $100 million until the court stepped in, all while preaching that having more wives brought a man closer to heaven. In 1998, Warren married his 8th wife, a 16-year-old girl named Vicky. And 2 years later, in the year 2000, Vicky gave birth to the couple's son, a boy they named Wendell. In 2004, Warren's nephew Brett came forward with a lawsuit claiming that Warren Jeffs had sexually assaulted him in the 1980s. And this opened the floodgates. Suddenly, more and more allegations of abuse surfaced publicly, including allegations from Warren's own family members and children who claimed that he mentally, physically, and sexually abused them. And at this point, with pressure closing in on him and authorities looking into his abusive past, Warren decided to move his clan down south to Texas. A year later, in 2005, Warren was hit with charges over his involvement in arranging a marriage between a 14-year-old girl named Alyssa Wall and her older cousin. And after being charged with this crime, Warren abandoned his dozens of wives and children and went on the run. And disturbingly, later on, photos even emerged of Warren with a new 12-year-old wife. However, in August of 2006, Warren was pulled over in Nevada for having his temporary license plates missing. And finally, in 2011, Warren was convicted on assaulting a minor in Texas. To this day, many diehard followers still consider Warren Jeffs to be the rightful prophet, believing he's been wrongly convicted. If you want to hear the full story of Vicky and Wendell, who escaped from Warren Jeffs and his cult, and their miraculous story of survival, check out the new Freeform show How I Escaped My Cult, which is streaming now on Hulu. This is the first time that Vicky and Wendell have shared their stories on video, and it's an incredibly powerful and disturbing watch.
How has no one heard of the Welsh version of the Chris Watts case? It was July 2000 in Barry, which is near Cardiff in Wales. Robert and Catherine Mottry lived in a £250,000 house with their 4 children. These were James, who was 18, Sean 16, Luke 14, and Bethan 10. The couple had been married for 23 years, and to everybody who knew them, they seemed like the perfect pair. Robert was 49 years old and was an entrepreneur. He owned a hotel and had previously ran a nightclub. His wife was the secretary of the local PTA and had just worked really hard to complete a philosophy and sociology degree. As you can see, she was just graduating here in this photo. They were always out doing things together as a family, going on family outings and little trips. No one had any reason to think that anything was wrong behind the scenes. But on the 23rd of July, it was actually a couple of Catherine's friends who raised the alarm. Much like in the Chris Watts case, when Shanann's friend went over to the house and just felt like something was off and she hadn't heard from her friend. They hadn't heard from Catherine in days, which was unusual, so the friends physically went over to the house. And they got no answer from the front door, they were getting no answer on the phone, so they actually decided to get a ladder and look up into the windows of the house. Inside they could see something on a bed covered with a sheet. Now, they decided to call police at this point, and when officers arrived, they couldn't believe what they found. It was described as a house of horrors. Children and their mother were all tragically dead inside of the house. They'd been laid on their beds, and one officer said, quote, "It seemed nearly an execution-style killing, and I have never come across, in 13 years nearly, a series of killings which appeared so methodical, so chilling, and clinical in the approach." Catherine's best friend had last seen her alive on the 11th of July after dropping her home after a salsa class they'd been to. The women had just hugged and said their goodbyes and said see you soon as normal, not knowing it would be the final farewell. Now, the weapon used for the crimes was never found, but it was determined that the family members had suffered blows to the head with a blunt object. There were no self-defense wounds or marks to indicate that any of them had tried to fight back, so they were definitely approached unaware. It was only when officers found Robert over the upstairs landing that they realised he had unalived himself. This was an obvious murder and self-unaliving. During the investigation, officers were very disturbed to find that Robert had in fact been inside the home alive with his dead wife and children for over 24 hours. He did the most bizarre things prior to unaliving himself, such as sending text messages to cancel his daughter's lift to school and leaving notes to cancel the milk delivery. Like, why do you care about the milk delivery? Despite the fact that Robert had ultimately unalived himself, he even went to the trouble to meticulously clean up the crime scene. He tidied and mopped up some blood. It's hard to kind of figure out what on earth was going on in his head at this time. Investigators really needed to take a closer look into computer and bank records to try and piece together what on earth had happened prior. As I said, he was a businessman, but he was secretly facing financial troubles, which only came out after his death. The hotel that he owned had been victim to a fire, and insurance companies were refusing to pay out. Robert was actually unable to sell the place, and it was quickly draining all of his savings. The family couldn't pay their mortgage for 2 months and were receiving a torrent of legal letters through the post, basically demanding the cash. And that wasn't the only secret that the family were hiding. Catherine had had an affair with one of Robert's colleagues, a man called David Osborne, and although this had ended prior to her death, she'd also started another affair more recently with a guy called Paul from the pub. She'd actually chillingly even sent him a message just hours before she was murdered saying, "Battery dead, call later." Now, we'll never know if Robert actually knew about these affairs or not, but Robert was no angel himself. He'd also had affairs, except he'd paid for his. He was apparently regularly seeing an S-worker called Charmaine. Evidence pointed to the fact that Robert had occasional issues with mental health, sometimes even experiencing delusions and refusing to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Whatever the reason, a family was brutally killed, and nobody will ever face justice.
There's something so incredibly disturbing about the death of Ray Rivera. It's not the fact that he was found dead in a conference room of a highly secure historical hotel 8 days after going missing. It's the fact that the only reason he was found was because his coworkers somehow spotted a hole in the roof of said hotel. And it's the fact that literally no one knows exactly how he ended up where he did, because the distance from where he supposedly jumped off to where the hole was in the roof does not add up. Oh, and let's not forget the cryptic note that was found folded up and taped to the back of his computer after his his death that talked about the Freemasons and other odd things. And I think most disturbing of all is the fact that before he went missing, he answered an unknown phone call to which he yelled, quote, "Oh shit," before running out of his house in a panic, ultimately to his death. This is the mysterious death of Ray Rivera, and I think more people should know what happened to him, so let's talk about it. Ray Rivera was 32 years old when he suddenly died on May 16th, 2006. At the time of his death, Ray was married to his longtime partner, Allison, and they lived in a quiet little neighborhood in Baltimore. The two had moved to Baltimore from California so that Ray could be closer to his childhood best friend, Porter. Porter was a publisher who owned his own investment company, which was called Stansberry and Associates Investment and Research. Porter offered Ray a job there as a writer and a videographer, and seeing as though Ray was an aspiring screenwriter, he gladly took the job. He thought it was a win-win getting to pursue his dreams with his wife, all while being closer to his best friend. About 6 months before his death, though, Ray suddenly resigned from his position at Porter's company. He then began writing as an independent contractor, but it was during this time that Ray's behavior began to change. According to his wife, Ray started becoming more and more paranoid, which seemed really random, and he wouldn't explain why. Then, one day out of the blue, the couple was at a local park when Ray encountered an unknown man. Allison had no idea who this man was or what they talked about, but she said that this encounter left Ray visibly distraught. This brings us to May 15th, 2006. Ray and Allison were woken up in the middle of the night to their house alarm going off, but when Ray went to investigate, he didn't find anyone. Although he did say that it looked like their window screens had been tampered with. Ray did seem scared, but they went back to bed without any more issues. The next morning, Allison had to go out of town for a business meeting, but Ray wasn't alone in the house, because staying with them was their friend Claudia. All seemed normal that day until about 4 p.m. when Claudia heard Ray answer the phone in his office. She didn't hear much of the conversation or know who called, but she heard Ray suddenly yell, quote, "Oh shit," end quote, before running frantically out of the back door of his house. He drove away but briefly came back, only to frantically run out of the house once again. He was in such a hurry that he left in his flip-flops, and he had left the lights and his computer on in his office. The entire rest of that day, Allison tried calling Ray, but she never got an answer. When she called Claudia later that night, Claudia told her that she overheard Ray's weird phone call, but they tried not to worry and thought maybe Ray was just out drinking or something. But when he still didn't return home by the next day, Allison knew something was horribly wrong. She came home early from her work trip and tried looking for him and calling him some more, but after not being able to get a hold of him, she reported him missing to the Baltimore Police Department. In the following days, a massive search for Ray was conducted, but it was like he vanished into thin air. Authorities were able to determine that his last known phone call, the one where he said "oh shit," came from Porter's investment company, but finding out who exactly made that call was tricky because the call had come from a switchboard, so it wasn't like a single line that could easily be traced back to a single person. Because of this, it was never determined who actually called Ray the night he went missing, or what they talked about that caused him to run out of his house, and no one ever came forward about this either, which made the investigation way more difficult. About a week after his disappearance, Ray's family found his car. It was parked in a parking lot off of St. Paul Street in the Mount Vernon neighborhood, and this was pretty close to Porter's investment company, aka where Ray used to work. It had a parking ticket on it from May 16th, the day he went missing, so clearly he had been in the area, but the question now was, where is Ray? Police searched the area but found no sign of him, but a day later, a mysterious discovery would be made that would turn this investigation upside down. A couple of Ray's old coworkers went to the top of a parking structure near where his car was found and noticed an odd hole in the roof of the Belvedere Hotel, which is a really historic, highly secure hotel in Baltimore. To be more exact, they were standing on the top of a parking structure right next door to the Belvedere Hotel, and they noticed the hole was in the south wing of the roof. And looking closer, it looked like someone's belongings were sitting on the roof near the hole. So this is when they notified police. When Baltimore PD went into the Belvedere Hotel beneath where the hole was, they made a gruesome discovery. There they found Ray's badly decomposed body, which just so happened to be in the conference room of the hotel. It was clear that he'd been dead pretty much the entire time he was missing, but this is where things start to get strange. So initially, police thought that Ray willingly jumped off the roof of the hotel, 14 stories up, and then crashed into a lower roof of this hotel and then landed in the conference room. But then the lead investigator on the case said that it looked like the scene had almost been staged. His glasses and his phone were found on the roof near the hole, but they were in great condition, all intact, and nothing was broken, which was odd because if he had jumped or fallen off the roof 14 stories up and then crashed into the building, you'd think that they would have had some damage to them. Then they examined Ray's injuries, which really only bring more questions to the case. So both of his shins had been broken inward and in an inconsistent way, and not only that, but the right side of his pelvis was crushed. He also had some fractured ribs, punctured lungs, and some damage to his skull. unusual. The medical examiner noted that if he had really jumped and had fallen feet first into the hotel, he wouldn't have had these types of injuries. According to them, his injuries were not completely consistent with just falling or jumping off of the roof, and it wasn't just the way he was injured that made investigators have doubt. The main question was how exactly he got to that part of the hotel where he supposedly fell in. Police theorized that he jumped from the top roof of the hotel and fell 14 stories to a lower roof of the hotel, but the hole was roughly 45 feet from the roof's edge, and the layout of the roof and the location of the hole just really don't add up, as there's a pretty sizable distance between the two. If Ray had fallen vertically like police initially thought, it would have been a fall of 177 feet, and it would have taken him roughly 3.3 seconds till impact. If he jumped from the main roof and somehow flew the distance of 43 feet to the lower roof before impact, he would have had to have been going a speed of 10 miles per hour. Investigators say this is somewhere between a fast run and a sprint for an average healthy man wearing running shoes. But here's the thing. At the time of his death, Ray was wearing flip-flops, which would have made it incredibly difficult to go that fast. And another thing that's highly suspicious is the fact that his flip-flops had drag marks on them, and it seemed incredibly unlikely that he would have been able to jump the entire 43 feet to the other side of the roof, especially with flip-flops on. The biggest mystery about this is how exactly Ray fell where he did and how he got there. So then police started looking into the possibility that he climbed up onto this really thin ledge of the hotel and jumped. But this was quickly ruled out because in order to get to that exact spot, he would have had to enter someone's office or another person's hotel room. So then police started investigating the possibility that Ray was murdered. But the only thing they found backing this up was one missing personal item. Ray had this really nice engraved money clip that he always carried with him, but when he was found, it was missing, and to this day, it's just mysteriously never been found. Authorities hope that there would be security footage from in and around the hotel, since this is a pretty secure hotel, but conveniently, all of the cameras on the roof and leading up to the roof weren't working due to technical problems. So then the next hope was that someone, either a guest of the hotel or an employee, saw Ray that day in the hotel, but no one did. I guess there weren't any alarms on their fire doors, and it was possible that the elevator was left unlocked for Ray to just walk in off the street. It was also rumored that the bartenders on the 13th floor of the hotel would sometimes go up to the roof to smoke, so it was possible that the door to the roof had been left unlocked or propped open. But for not one single person to have seen or heard Ray that day, it just seems so unusual, and not one person physically saw him on the roof either. Another weird thing to me is the fact that Ray had been dead inside of the conference room of the hotel for over a week, yet not one single employee reportedly saw or smelled him. So even though every aspect of this case was bizarre and really unexplained, authorities really didn't have much to go off of. The medical examiner ruled his death as undetermined because it wasn't clear what had actually killed Ray, since he didn't have a loss of blood and none of his injuries were extremely life-threatening. Authorities closed the case, citing his death as undetermined but a probable suicide. Allison and the rest of his family just don't agree though. Ray seemed happy, they were trying for a baby, and he'd even rented out an office space the weekend he disappeared to write, which doesn't really suggest that he would take his own life. So this made Allison search their house for any clues that could explain if he really did this to himself, or even a possible suicide note. And what she found is chilling, but this also only raises more questions. Allison found a folded up piece of paper in plastic taped to the back of Ray's computer. It was a note that he had written the day he died, and it appeared really random. It was addressed to, quote, brothers and sisters, end quote, and referred throughout to a well-played game. In the note, he requested to be 5 years younger, and he listed names of prominent figures in Hollywood, movies, and Freemason quotes. The note began and ended in phrases used in the Masonic order. Allison did hand this over to the FBI, and after they analyzed the note, they concluded that it was not a suicide note, but rather just a strange note that Ray wrote. Why he tried to hide it like that is still a mystery. Allison said Ray liked anything involving secret societies and did have a seemingly new interest in the Freemasons, but since he was a writer, this could have just been a random list of things that he wanted to research about. One thing that is weird though, is that a representative at a local Freemasons lodge did confirm that Ray inquired about a membership the same day he went missing, but ultimately this was ruled out as having any connection to his death.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 1. This game is called the Picture Game, and it's a paranormal game that allows you to take pictures of ghosts. To play the game, you will need at least 2 people and a phone with a flash. Then find an empty room and sit directly across from each other. Then turn off the lights and hold hands and say, "I trust you" to each other. Now say, "The door is open, please come in" 3 times at the same time. Now open your eyes. Whatever wanted to come into the room is now in there. Now each of you grab your phone and take a picture of each other while saying I caught you. Now do this 3 times each. Now both of you close your eyes again and say it's time to go home. Turn on the lights and then look at the photos you guys took of each other. One of you would then see a ghost standing behind you, and the other one won't, but the person that has the ghost behind them will experience paranormal activity for at least a week. Now the ghost won't harm you at all, but it would do its best to completely terrify you. So are you playing this game? Because I'm definitely not.
Murder conviction was overturned after the eyewitness was found to be legally blind. A man from Chicago spent 12 years behind bars due to eyewitness testimony from someone who was found to be legally blind. Darian Harris was just 18 years old when he was convicted of the murder of Rondell Moore. Rondell had been shot at a petrol station in 2011 and had passed away. Darian was previously sentenced to 76 years in prison for the crime and is now 30 years old. However, a recent revelation changed all of that. The eyewitness Dexter Saffold proved crucial in the murder conviction and picked Darian out of a police lineup just a few days after the killing. Darian's family, though, maintained that he'd actually been at home watching the NBA playoffs during the time of the killing. Darian had just been about to graduate high school when he was accused of the murder. Dexter was later found to have been legally blind during the fatal shooting. It transpired that he had markedly reduced vision, especially at night. Prosecutors are reportedly planning to retry Darian on the murder charge.
I was stranded in an airport for 18 years. My name is Mehran Karimi Nasri, and I was born in 1942 in Iran. My story is quite unique. In 1986, I attempted to travel to England to seek political asylum, but unfortunately, I lost my documents during a layover in Paris. Without proper documentation, I found myself stuck at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The French authorities couldn't allow me entry into France, and I couldn't return to Iran as I feared for my life. So, I remained stranded in the airport transit zone from 1988 to 2006. Over the years, I learned to survive in this confined space, relying on the generosity of passengers and airport staff for food and other necessities. My life was marked by a daily routine of sleeping on a bench, reading newspapers, and writing in my journal. My story garnered international media attention, inspiring the movie The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks. Eventually, in 2006, I was hospitalized for health issues, and the French authorities granted me permission to reside in France. Since then, I have been living in a shelter, attempting to rebuild my life after those long years spent in the airport.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know how Malaysia Flight 370 completely disappeared without a trace. Well, the video I'm about to show you shows what people are saying is Flight 370 disappearing through a portal with 3 orbs rotating around it. Do you think this video is real or fake? Either way, it's extremely interesting and it's completely going viral. Here it is.
I was fired from my job, so I decided to crash the plane my boss was on. My name is David Burke, and on December 7, 1987, I did something irreparable. I was a father of 7, working for our airline as a ticket agent. At home, we were struggling financially, and on my salary, I could barely support my family. However, one day I was accused of stealing $69 from the cash register by my manager, Raymond Thompson. As a result, my boss fired me. The income I desperately needed for my family was suddenly gone. I was furious, and soon after, I decided to buy a ticket for the same flight as my former boss, Raymond. I smuggled a Magnum revolver onto the plane. After a 20-minute flight, I got up and handed Raymond a note before heading for the toilets. In the lavatory, I took out my Magnum revolver, and as soon as I was out of the lavatory, I approached Raymond and shot him twice in the chest. After that, I went through the cockpit, where I shot the stewardess and the 2 pilots. I took control of the wheel, and the plane quickly plunged. One of the passengers, who was a pilot, tried to stop me. However, I managed to shoot him. Tragically, the plane, with 43 people on board, crashed because of me, and all 43 died, including me.
My father didn't like my boyfriend, so we decided to kill him. We recorded this video shortly after committing our crime.
I don't know what to say.
Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Day 3 after murdering somebody.
Whoa! Don't put that on the camera.
It was worth it.
And we had sex a lot today.
I'm Sierra Halseth. I'm a 16-year-old American girl. And in 2020, I fell in love with 18-year-old Aaron Guerrero. We were obsessed with each other, and nothing could stand in the way of our love. However, there was one big problem. My own father, Daniel Halseth, disapproved of my relationship with Aaron because he was 2 years older than me and a bad influence on me. In addition, my mother, who was separated from my father, disapproved of the relationship between the two of us. They decided to forbid Aaron to see me. We were furious. Nothing could stand in the way of our love, so we decided to do something terrible. Aaron and I went to my father's house, where we brutally slaughtered him and set him on fire. We then hid him in the garage and tried to erase all traces. However, in the days following our deed, a video was discovered in which we confessed to our crime. We laughed and showed no remorse in the video. We quickly tried to escape from the police and leave the country, but to no avail. The judge found us both guilty, and we were both sentenced to 22 years in prison. Should we be given a second chance?
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so the video you're about to see shows a skier going down a mountain when suddenly a bear starts chasing her. And I mean starts chasing her to kill her. And the entire time she doesn't see the bear or realize it's chasing her because she's listening to Work by Rihanna. She was seconds away from death. Here's the video.
This mum of 7 was found dead with a dog collar wrapped around her neck. Leah Penny was 31 from Malden, Massachusetts. She was a mother of 7 living in Lebanon Street in 2017. Leah had suffered with addiction issues in the past, but she'd managed to get herself clean and was a dedicated mother. She knew she had a precious second chance with her children, but it would be snatched away from her in the most devastating way. Neighbours described Leah as a wonderful mother, and the community was stunned by her tragic end. Police responded to a 911 call in June that year and headed to Leah's address. When they arrived, they found her deceased with a dog collar wrapped around her neck at the bottom of her stairs. 2 of Leah's children were upstairs in the cot unharmed. The children's father was Ryan Power, but he was nowhere to be seen. Ryan's mum was actually the one that found Leah at the bottom of the stairs after going round to look after her grandchildren. Leah's other children were aged 14, 10, 9, 6 and 4 at the time. 32-year-old Ryan was immediately a suspect. He'd apparently left home the night before following an argument. He was eventually tracked down in New Hampshire the day after when police managed to trace his location through a phone call that he'd made to his mum. Now, Ryan shockingly had been previously charged with assault and battery on Leah in the May. Authorities were seeking a restraining order, but it had never been granted. Leah's mum stated that Ryan had been abusive to her throughout the relationship and had isolated her from family and friends. He'd once gone as far as to kidnap one of their children, and she was terrified to leave him due to what he was capable of. Leah's mum also recalled her posting a chilling Facebook status. It reportedly said, "Ryan and I got into it again tonight, and if you ever find me dead, you'll know Ryan did it." Ryan admitted to choking Leah and was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was given life in prison without parole.
These are videos with the most haunting backstories, and this series is going to be crazy. This is security footage of Luca Magnotta kidnapping a man named Jung Lin before making the infamous one lunatic, one ice pick video. He tied him to a bed and then with an ice pick he stabbed Jung Lin until he died. After he died, Luca did the following. He cut his head, legs, and arms off and then started sexually abusing the body. He stuck a bottle inside of Jung Lin's body and even ate his flesh, and also fed the flesh to the dog in the room. You also see him take Jung Lin's body parts to the garbage can in the video too, which is right here. Luca Magnotta then mailed Jung Lin's hands and feet to elementary schools and federal political party offices. And after a video depicting the murder was posted online, which I explained on this channel in detail, Luca Magnotta fled Canada, becoming the subject of an Interpol Red Notice and prompting an international manhunt. In 2012, he was arrested in an internet cafe in Berlin while searching himself up on the internet. The video that Luca posted of him committing the murder is just awful and inhumane. This man was obsessed with being famous and did anything to do so. He wanted to become a serial killer, but he got caught before he could carry out any more gruesome murders like this. I don't recommend searching for this video at all, especially if you've seen my video explaining it already. But if you're interested in this case, there is a Netflix documentary called Don't F With Cats that explains the case start to finish, and I highly recommend watching that instead of the one lunatic, one ice pick video. This footage is just so haunting because Jung Lin thought he was going to have a fun night with the stranger he just met, but instead it turned into a living nightmare. And what's even more sinister is that this wasn't a random murder. Luca planned this before Jung Lin even arrived at the place he was staying at.
This girl from Nuneaton was last seen alive on her Ring doorbell. Within an hour, she would be dead. Megan Newborough was 23 years old and a bright HR advisor. She met her colleague 30-year-old Ross McCullum at work. The pair initially got on and started dating. Just a few weeks later, things would end in tragedy. She left the house reportedly in a great mood on Friday, the 6th of August 2021 at around 7:30. She told family she was just going for a walk. Tragically, she had no idea what was about to happen to her. Obviously, when she failed to return home, alarm bells started to ring. Her family made numerous calls, but nobody had seen her or heard from her. They reported her missing to police and were really terrified when they found her phone in a bush. They had used the Find My iPhone app, and the discovery of the phone was obviously deeply concerning. Police knew this was now likely to be a kidnap. They decided to speak to Ross, as the pair had been dating, so he was an obvious person of interest. He told police that she had been with him that evening, but left at 9 p.m. to get a McDonald's. He denied seeing her since then. Now, Megan's phone actually had messages off Ross that evening, and he left her a voicemail to say how much he loved her. However, police were obviously incredibly suspicious. After he was extensively interviewed, he eventually confessed to killing her. It transpired that Megan had gone to Ross's house where he strangled her and cut her throat. He then coldly texted her phone to tell her how amazing she was in order to throw police off the scent. He then put her body in her car and drove to a remote location where he dumped her body. He threw her phone into that bush on the way. He was captured on CCTV changing his clothes by her car. After then ditching the car in Loughborough, he casually got a taxi home. He then spent the evening looking at serial killers online and looking at indecent images and videos. He claimed he acted in a blind rage after remembering SA from his childhood. He was jailed for life with a minimum of 23 years, and multiple inmates have reported that he has bragged about the killing while inside prison.
The Chris Chan story is one of the most disturbing things I've ever read about, and you don't want to hear what they did with their mother. The story of Chris Chan is a very, very disturbing and complicated one. But in 2007, she created a comic called Sonichu, and for some reason people were really attracted to this, and they started to become infatuated with the comics creator Chris Chan. Now, the comics themselves are bizarre, but they're not really that special. And people really latched onto this story for some reason. They wanted to follow Chris Chan's life, and a lot of this original stuff that was going on was trolling, but it began to take a really strange turn. Now, in 2015, Chris and her mom had to attend a court hearing because allegedly she had assaulted a video game store employee. And at that point, people began to notice that Chris was very close to her mom. Then, the following year in 2016, Chris wrote a Facebook post defending a mother and son in Mexico who said that they were in love with each other. She basically wrote and defended incest and said that in some cases it isn't bad if a parent and their offspring have these relations with each other. And she even wrote that she had had dreams of having intercourse with her own mother. But then, fast forward to 2021, and screenshots and a recording were leaked that allegedly show Chris Chan discussing how they have abused and slept with their own mother. Apparently, the person on this recording that claims to be Chris claims that they have assaulted their mother 3 times a week for the last couple of months, and that the mom has memory problems and can't really recall what's going on. This was obviously concerning, but on August 1st, 2021, this all came to a head when Chris Chan was arrested on a felony incest charge. Yes, Chris was accused of actually having sex with their own mother. Now, this is a felony in Virginia, the state that Chris lives in, but to this date, there's still no real resolution in the case. Apparently, Chris was released from jail on March 27th of this year and has another hearing on August 8th when we're going to find out more details about exactly what happened, what evidence prosecutors have. But no matter how you look at this entire situation, this is just disturbing to me.
At 8:30 this morning, a 15-year-old girl was murdered on her way to school in Croydon, South London. Officers were on the scene within 2 minutes of receiving a 999 call to say that a schoolgirl had been stabbed. A bus driver and a passerby tried to resuscitate the girl, but their efforts were futile and tragically she died at the scene. A cordon could be seen surrounding a double-decker bus, and a white tent was also erected outside the Whitgift Centre. A bunch of flowers had also been placed at the scene. Shockingly, this is the 15th teenage homicide just this year, with 3 months still to go. Last year, there were 14. In the last 12 months, Croydon has had more stabbings than any other London borough, with 211 knife crime offences recorded. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder, and it's thought that he was known to the victim. I'll update, obviously, in the comments when there is any more information on this case.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This pair did on Christmas Eve is like something out of a horror film. It was Christmas in Washington State in 2007. Families were gathering together in anticipation of the big day and sharing gifts. However, 29-year-old Michelle Anderson and her boyfriend had an entirely different idea of what they would do during the festive season. Michelle's boyfriend was Joseph McEnroe. The pair headed over to Michelle's family home on Christmas Eve. Michelle was reportedly angry with her parents as they had recently requested that she started paying rent. At 29 years old, they felt that she needed to start contributing to the household. The home was in a rural area and Michelle had her own space in a caravan on her parents' land. So far, she'd been living there for free. Michelle and her boyfriend armed themselves and headed to the home that afternoon. When they arrived, her parents, Judy and Wayne, were sat there wrapping gifts. Joseph distracted Judy while Michelle tried to shoot her dad. However, the gun jammed, so Joseph took over and shot both parents. The pair then took the bodies outside and cleaned the house. They knew some visitors were on the way. It wasn't long before Michelle's 32-year-old brother Scott and his wife Erica would arrive. They also had with them their 2 children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They'd all been excited to spend Christmas with their family, not realising they wouldn't even make it to Christmas Day. Michelle shot Scott and killed him. The pair then both shot Erica, who fell to the ground injured. She managed to crawl her way to the phone and ring police. Dispatchers could reportedly hear a horrifying scene going on in the background of the call. That was until Joseph snatched the phone off Erica and smashed it on the ground. He then shot her again, killing her. He then shot and killed the 2 innocent children because he apparently didn't want them to be scarred for life. Infuriatingly, when police arrived at the property, they found the gate was locked, so they simply left. It wasn't until Boxing Day that the massacre was uncovered. Judy's best friend had arrived to investigate when she didn't turn up for work. Peering through the window, she saw 2 dead bodies on the floor and rang police. Michelle and Joseph were questioned and admitted to the killings. Michelle said she was angry about being asked for rent and also angry at her brother for owing her money. They were both given life in prison.
This story is absolutely heartbreaking. Both of these babies died on separate occasions while in the care of their grandmother. Just days before Christmas in 2021, Kyla Nix left her 16-month-old son Ezra in the care of her mother Tracy. Tracy's partner was out running errands and Tracy fell asleep in the living room on the couch. When she woke up, she couldn't find Ezra in the house. She went out into the garden and found him face down in the garden pond. Instead of immediately calling 911, Tracy started CPR and phoned her partner to tell him what had happened to Ezra. He then phoned Ezra's father, Drew, and said something's happened to Ezra. When Kyla heard that something had happened to Ezra, she immediately jumped in her car and started driving. She was doing 85 miles an hour, and at 6 months pregnant, she got in a head-on collision with another car. She could see the air ambulance heading to her mother's house, and she wasn't looking where she was going. She left the car and started running, desperately trying to get to her son. Ezra was taken to hospital but died on December 23rd in his parents' arms, and just 3 months later, Kyla gave birth to her daughter Uriel. Kyla and Drew were absolutely devastated about their son's death, but it was ruled an accident and they believed in second chances, and Kyla still wanted her mother in her life. Tracy was usually supervised when she had visitation rights to Uriel, but on November 22nd, she was with her alone. She was out for lunch with friends, and Kyla thought that Uriel would be perfectly safe. Tracy drove home after lunch with Uriel in the back of the car, and she went inside to practice piano. One of Tracy's grandsons arrived at the house, and when he entered through the front door, Tracy immediately realised that she'd left Uriel in the back of her SUV. She'd been left in the back of that car all afternoon in 90-degree heat with the windows up. She didn't stand a chance. When Drew arrived to collect his daughter, he saw ambulances and immediately had flashbacks to Ezra's death. There was absolutely nothing paramedics could do to save Uriel, and the heartbreaking news then had to be broken to Kyla. Police showed up at her door and told her that her baby was dead. At first she was really confused as she thought they were talking about Ezra, but they said, "No, Kyla, Uriel is dead." Kyla and Drew are now demanding that Tracy goes to jail. Kyla said, "If I'm objective, she needs to go to jail. As her daughter, it breaks my heart to say it, but as their mother, I demand it." Tracy has been charged with manslaughter and faces up to 30 years behind bars for Uriel's death, meaning if she's found guilty, she could spend the rest of her life behind bars.
This is Shannon McCool, one of the worst pedophiles of all time. I'm going to warn you right now, this story is incredibly disturbing and hard to listen to, so viewer discretion is advised. Shannon McCool is from Australia, and according to interviews that he gave after his arrest, he started having these feelings towards other children when he was 15 years old. So from a very young age, he felt these pedophilic behaviors and desires. In the year 2011, he began working for the Families SA, which is a part of the Australian government that oversees childcare and abuse. And through this government job, he was able to get access to hundreds of children. These kids had been through it all already. They came from abusive and negative backgrounds, and he took this and used it to his advantage. He was able to get access to these kids for years, and even though other employees reported that he had been acting inappropriately with these youngsters, nothing happened. The government agencies ignored these red flags and kept him under their employment. But in the shadows, Shannon was engaging in some of the most deplorable internet behavior I've ever read about. He was a moderator for a website called The Love Zone, a website which had connections to Peter Scully, Richard Huckle, and a number of other pedophiles that we've talked about here on my TikTok in the past. But apparently, for other pedophiles to get access to this massive library of CP and become a member of the Love Zone, they had to upload their own user-generated CP at least once a month. This means that Shannon wasn't just taking kids from residential homes, abusing them, filming the videos, and putting them up on the internet for other people to seek out. He was actually encouraging people all across the planet to commit their own atrocious things. And he would then tell them that if you want access to his media, you would have to upload your own. So he was encouraging just so much abuse across the planet. According to Shannon, the first time that he had done something like this was in 2011 when he picked up a kid from childcare, was driving him home, pulled the car over, touched him inappropriately, filmed it, and then uploaded it. And from that point going forward, he was gone, and he eventually worked his way up to being one of the biggest pedophiles on the internet, dealing CP to millions across the globe. One of his alleged offenses even includes the assault of an 18-month-old child. But eventually, Shannon's crimes would come to the light. And that's when Task Force Argo stepped in, a division of the Queensland Police Service, who specifically investigate child exploitation and abuse online. I find it interesting that they use a scorpion as their logo for the task force, because the scorpion is the natural predator of the Australian stone spider, and pedophiles in Australian prisons are referred to as stone spiders. Well, eventually, there's a longer story that I could go into this about how the police actually ended up running a pedophile website and busting a ton of people, but that led them to Shannon McCool's house. Now, when they investigated his home, they found over 53,000 CP images, a good number of which he was actually directly involved with producing. And in total, after all of their investigation was completed, they had recovered over 100,000 CP still images and over 600 videos from Shannon. In 2015, he received 35 years in prison for his crimes, but recently his sentence was slashed. And I don't think that he'll be in there long enough. This former NFL player is one of the most evil men in the sport's history. Meet Darren Sharper, a former football safety who played in the NFL for 14 seasons. During the course of his career, Darren played on a number of different teams, including the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, and ultimately the New Orleans Saints. Now, Darren was an incredibly good player, and he frequently signed contracts for over $2 million a year. His career ended in the year 2010 after a devastating injury that he suffered. And it was after he retired from the NFL when he committed a string of despicable crimes. In March of 2011, two women in Miami came forward to the police and stated that Darren had drugged them and assaulted them in his condo. Now, even though both of these women had detailed matching accounts about what happened, they were taken to the hospital for grape examination. The investigation was closed by the Miami PD just 5 days after it was opened. And evidence shows that the detective on the case never even visited Darren's apartment, he never questioned Darren, and he never sent in the rape kits for further examination. And I think getting away with this really set Darren off. Next, in February of 2013, he helped drug a model at a Super Bowl party. And Darren's friend then proceeded to assault her. In August 2013, he allegedly assaulted another woman in New Orleans. Then in September 2013, he drugged two women with his friend and assaulted both of them. Now, keep in mind, every time that this was happening, these women were going to the police and investigations were being opened. But nothing was being done. Keep in mind, this was such a high-profile case that the prosecution eventually admitted that they, delayed some of the proceedings because they didn't want to mess this up. But in delaying these proceedings, Darren was allowed to continue on his spree of terror. October 2013, Darren drugs two women and assaults one of them in his hotel room. They go to the police and still nothing's done. November 2013, Darren comes across three students who go to the University of Arizona. He drugs all three of them and then assaults two of them. Both women underwent examinations within 12 hours of the assault and went to the police. January 2014, Darren meets two women at two different Hollywood parties. He then takes them back to his hotel room, drugs them, and assaults both of them, and they both go to the police. Then, the day after this previous assault in LA, Darren is in Las Vegas. He meets two women and a man that are out at a club drinking. And he drugs all three of them before he takes the two women back to his hotel room to assault both of them. So keep in mind, for a 9-month period, there were pending charges against Darren. He'd been reported to authorities multiple times for assaulting women, and yet none of these agencies worked together, and he was allowed to roam the streets freely and keep committing crimes. This was an absolutely massive failure of the justice system, and this case still is so shocking because this really was an extended spree of crimes that he was just basically allowed to commit. In 2016, though, Darren was finally sentenced to 20 years in prison. And shockingly, he's going to be released from prison in 2028, which means he only served 12 years of that 20-year sentence. I personally don't think that's nearly enough for all of these assaults, but that's the American justice system for you.